Hey guys, welcome to Rough Riders. I'm Jay Taylor. On October 1st, Skydio announced the Skydio 2 to a lot of press and reviews and commentary, some of it good, some of it bad. I did my own video on the Skydio 2 where I covered some of the basic features of the drone, as well as why, as an engineer, I felt this was a unique and important milestone for the industry. In this video, I wanted to take a little bit deeper dive and look at the chips that actually power the Skydio and help enable some of the great features that it's capable of, and do some quick comparison to the Mavic 2 and how these two really stack up against each other. So stick around and check that out. So when I saw the Skydio 2 promo videos, like everybody, I was intrigued. I was somewhat skeptical as well. There were a lot of skeptics out there who were thinking that this was smoke and mirrors and marketing fluff, because after the Lily drone, I think everybody would be a little skeptical. That was quite a debacle, right? So, I really wanted to understand what this drone was doing and how it was doing it. And for me, that came down to three fundamental questions. Is the hardware capable? Can it do the things necessary? Because when you think about what is being asked of the drone, it has to pull all the data in from the 6 cameras and create that 360-degree sphere. It has to create this, take all that data that's coming in, 45 megapixels of data coming in, and build a hyper-accurate 3D map of the environment. It then has to recognize the objects that are in its path and plot a flight path around those objects. It still has to track the subject that it's tracking, and it's got to do all of this at up to speeds of 36 miles an hour. That means it's got to be constantly updating that map. It's got to be constantly aware of the changes that are going on, and then making decisions in real time about how to fly around those objects without losing the subject that it's tracking. That is a massive amount of number crunching that has to take place in order to do that. So in order for that to happen, it's got to have a very robust platform. Take a look at this clip, and it'll start to give you a sense of everything that is going on in real time. So this is the same clip that I showed in my last video. Again, this was provided by Skydio, so take that with a grain of salt. But I do think it's an accurate representation of what's happening. But in this clip, right, we have the mountain biker that's riding through the trails. And you can see that as he's riding through the trails, what the drone is seeing and what the drone is doing is plotting its flight path. It's building this 3D map of the world. It doesn't have to be color correct, and it doesn't have to worry about exposure and things like that. It just has to have the data necessary to build that map. And that's exactly what it's doing as it's flying around and tracking the subject and avoiding the obstacles. And that is a lot of number crunching. So that's a very robust platform that has to do that. The second question then is, if the hardware is capable, then is the software capable? Now that's a harder question to answer because it's not shipping to the public yet, right? The first shipments are in the next 2 weeks or so, and so we don't have real world user experiences with this drone to draw any conclusions from. So in order to be able to answer this question, if the software is capable, you have to start looking at the engineers that are designing this product, and what is their experience, what have they done in the past, and has it been successful? And so that's where you have to start looking at looking for information online to try and determine the answers to that question. Then the third question is the ecosystem mature enough? Are there the necessary tools to go build this object avoidance and mapping and autonomy and all of those sorts of things? So those were the questions I wanted to try and answer as I was doing my research, and I'll share some of that with you today. And since I was looking into the Skydio, a lot of people are comparing the Skydio to the Mavic, so I figured, okay, I might as well go look at the Mavic architecture while I'm at it and see how these two stack up. So let's start with the hardware. So to start my investigative work here on the architecture and the hardware, I really started looking around online at a number of different sources. I went to Hot Chips, which is a great resource for silicon information about various processors and things like that. So I found a great presentation up there from the Movidius CEO and co-founder, or their CTO and co-founder. And these are the guys that make the Myriad MA2155, which is what's used in the DJI Mavic 2 platform. Great presentation up there with a lot of really good information on the Myriad 2. I did some more digging. I found the product brief online and block diagrams and things like that that cover the Myriad. I also went and found a more detailed block diagram as well online. So I started studying all of this information to get a sense of what the Myriad 2 is capable of doing. And then I did the same thing for the Jetson NVIDIA part. I went to NVIDIA's website and pulled down some basic specifications off their website. I did some more digging. I found a detailed block diagram of the Jetson part. I also found a data sheet online for this part, so I compiled all that data, and then I did the same thing for the Qualcomm SC605. Not as much information there, but I was able to find some information on their website, as well as a product brief that went into some more detail on the Qualcomm part. So basically what I did then was I compiled all of that into a spreadsheet. And started just lining these things up and comparing them. And so what you see here is on the left hand side, I've got the CPU core count, the GPU cores, the image processor, just a lot of the basic features of each piece of silicon or SoC, at least the primary features. And then I also added down here, I added the links, so anybody that wants to go out there and look this information up themselves, they can do that and do their own comparison. So I do, this wasn't everything that I found, but this was a lot of the key information that I pulled from. So let's take a look at these things side by side and see how they actually stack up. So as I said, the DJI Mavic 2 platform runs the Movidius Myriad MA2155 SoC. They call this a VPU, which is a video processing unit. Okay, and it's comprised of two 32-bit RISC cores. One of these is a runtime processor, and the other one is for the bus interfaces and processing the data that's coming in off those bus interfaces. So stuff like USB, Gigabit Ethernet, I2C, I2S, those buses. It has 12 vector processors, so this is the equivalent of their GPU. They don't really call it a GPU, but you could essentially look at this as being a 12-core GPU with which are vector processors, because a GPU and a vector processor are basically the same thing. The image processor is a single image processor, and it's a software configurable to do either vision processing or image processing, or you can switch it back and forth. My guess is that this is primarily set up in the DJI part as a image processor, especially the Mavic 2 Pro, because they don't have other cameras feeding this thing. They've got IR sensors and things like that, so that would be handled by a different piece of hardware. And then some of the basic features in the image processor. It has a bunch of hardware accelerator blocks that make up that image processor, And these hardware accelerator blocks, they do split their time between some of the blocks are dedicated to machine vision, and some of the blocks are dedicated to image processing. Okay, it's got 256 kilobytes of L2 cache. It's got, and this is one of the things that's really cool about this thing, is that it's got 2 megabytes of intelligent memory fabric. In the block diagram, it shows you this memory fabric, and let me just switch over to that real quick, so you can see what I'm talking about. That is this piece right here. So you can see it's got this intelligent memory fabric right here. And basically that acts like a L2 cache for the image processor. It's actually a pretty cool design, and what that ends up doing is reducing the amount of time that the image processor has to go out to the DDR RAM down here, and minimizing the amount of traffic and on the bus, as well as utilization of that memory. Because when the image processor is utilizing the memory, then nothing else can use it. So, it sort of minimizes some of that, and so that's actually kind of an interesting design in this VPU. So that is pretty cool. It's got up to 1 gigabyte of actually this should say DDR2 or DDR3. I think what they're doing in the Mavic is probably DDR3. Then it's got a 12-lane MIPI interface for the camera, and pulling that in, and it's pulling it in at 18 gigabits per second, which is basically 1.5 gigabits per lane. And it's doing all of this at 1 watt nominal power. So that's actually really cool, because the lower the power, the longer your flight time is going to be, right? So that's kind of the basic setup of the Mavic. Now let's take a look at what's going on with the Skydio, and this is where you start to see some very, very stark differences between the two platforms. First thing to notice is that the Skydio has 2 different SoCs. It's got the NVIDIA Jetson TX2 SoC, and it's got the Qualcomm SC605 SoC. So 2 different SoCs. The Qualcomm is dedicated for image processing, and the Jetson is dedicated for all the flight controls, the navigation, that mapping, object tracking. All of that stuff is going on the Jetson. Now this is really cool from an architectural point of view, because what they've done is they've split the image processing out of and created its own subsystem. That's really, really important here, because what that means is you don't have that 4K video chunking up a lot of the memory bandwidth. The CPU utilization is not being sucked down by that image processing. Where on the Mavic, that's one SoC doing everything. So you've got 3 different compute units competing for time on that memory bus, and for those memory resources and CPU resources. And so every time that video is running, it's taking time away from the mapping, navigation, the object avoidance, and all that kind of thing. So there's a lot of switching that ends up going on back and forth between there. Now they're context switching, but it's still a lot of switching going back and forth. And so because of that, you're somewhat limited in just how much data you can do at any given time with any individual CPU. With the Skydio, they've split off that, and because video takes up a huge amount of resources and stuff, and so by splitting that off into its separate subsystem, that is a really, really smart move on Skydio's part, because that frees up the Jetson to really do a lot of other really cool stuff, like the object tracking, like the object avoidance, like building that 3D map. And so that's why they can do what they do, is because they've got a ton of processing power dedicated solely to those purposes. Now, when you start talking about a ton of processing, look what's going on inside this thing. This thing's a beast, right? So you've got a single dual-core processor, 64-bit. This is the Denver architecture, and there's some, on Hot Chips, there's some actually really good slides from NVIDIA on the Denver architecture by itself. if you're a geek like me, then that's interesting reading. But I'm not going to go into all of that right now. But it's got the dual core Denver, and then it's got a separate quad core ARM processor built into this thing. So now you're talking about 6 cores of CPU processing in the Jetson versus the 2 cores in the Myriad, right? But it doesn't stop there, because then you go look over to the column to the right, and then you've got another 8 cores on the Qualcomm. So now you're talking about a massive amount of CPU processing power built into this thing, and that's just the CPU. Go down to the next line. What do you got? You've got 256 cores of graphics processors. These are vector processors, okay? 256 cores. That's massive amount of processing power when you compare it to the 12 vector processors inside the Myriad. Then again, go to the right. What do you got? You got another Adreno core for GPU stuff. So just between all of this stuff, you've got a lot of processing power going on. Now then you go down to the next line, and you got the image processor. So you've got the dedicated image processor for the Skydio or for the Jetson, right? Now this isn't the way they've got this configured. Dollars to donuts is that they've got this thing configured just to pull in all of that data from those 6 cameras, right? And you saw from that mapping video, it's not looking for color aberration or color and contrast and all that kind of stuff. It's looking for the data points of where those objects are. What does the environment look like? That's all it's doing, is pulling that in and feeding that directly into that 256 core GPU so it can go build that map. So that's what's going on with the Jetson. And then when you go over to the right and you start looking at the Qualcomm, it's got dual ISP image sensor processors in there capable of up to 32 megapixels. So each ISP can handle 16 megapixels of data. Now it has all the hardware, well, not the same hardware acceleration blocks as the Myriad, but it's got a number of hardware acceleration blocks built into these ISPs, right? So for your electronic image stabilization, your lens compensation, dewarp, motion compensation, noise filtering, all of that kind of stuff built into this thing, to process the images coming off the main camera. So it can do a lot of work, and that's why even with that 1 over 2/3 image sensor, they've got a lot of horsepower behind it to process the data coming in from that and do a lot of really good stuff and give you really good quality video, right? Go down further, you've got your 4 megabytes of cache on the Jetson, 2 for the Denver core, 2 for the quad core ARM. You've got 4 gigabytes of DDR4, so you get a lot of memory, a lot of very fast memory to be able to process all that data that's coming in. Look at the MIPI interface, right? Another 12-lane MIPI interface, but it's at 30 gigabits per second. Each lane is 2.5 gigabits per second of data coming in off of that. And the same is true with the image processor for the Qualcomm. Right, so you got lots of bandwidth on that MIPI interface using the camera sensor interface technology with the DeFi. So it's got a lot of capabilities built in between these 2 parts. So this is a really brilliant architecture, in my opinion. Now it comes at a cost, because when you go to look at the power draw of this thing, that Jetson by itself is 7.5 watts to 15 watts. That's a power-hungry processor. And so that's what's going to eat into your flight time. And so, there is some trade-offs. To add that much horsepower, you do trade it off in the sense of TDP, right? Typical power, or total power dissipation. So, that's what's going on from a side-by-side perspective of the architecture. You start to see that the Skydio is a different animal altogether. Okay, so the hardware seems very capable, which means they built a very strong foundation for the software engineers to go do their magic. So then that brings you to the next question of, are these guys capable? Do they have the experience to go do this, right? For that, I started digging into their LinkedIn profiles and going and looking at their past history of projects that they've worked on. Looked at what other things they did at other companies. It's well known these guys are MIT grads. Adam Bray and Abraham Bachrach they both come out of MIT doing autonomous flight and drone work and all that kind of stuff there. 10 years ago. So they've been doing this for a long time. They've worked on Google's project. They've worked on some of the Tesla stuff. They've worked on. Adam went and worked at. He did some farm equipment, autonomous tractors and things like that to navigate the fields. Which, so these guys have a pretty rich history between the CEO and the CTO. But I dug a little bit further to see who else was working on this project, and they've got a guy out of Stanford's research, Hayek Matrios. Forgive me if I butchered it, but he's the head of their autonomy. He comes out of Stanford doing research. He's got a master in robotics and things like that. So he's got a long, rich history of working on this stuff as well. So you're talking about guys that have a lot of experience developing this stuff. So that leads me to believe that the software is going to be very, very capable of doing the things that they're showing that it's doing. So that brings me to the third piece then, which is the ecosystem capable, right? If the hardware is capable and the engineers are capable, then do they have the tools necessary to go build this thing? And the answer for that is yes. Actually, a lot of the pieces are there. If you take, for example, building that 3D map, that really accurate 3D map, well, guess what? That's been around for a long time in the gaming space, going back to the Quake engine, the Unreal Engine, and a lot of the software games, the really advanced first-person shooters, and the level of detail they provide in their 3D maps. Those game engines have been around and they continue to improve. And so they have a ready supply of tools that they can pull from the gaming industry to go build that 3D mapping space, right? GPS tracking technology, mature, been around forever. Image processing, mature, been around forever. Artificial intelligence, mature and rapidly improving all the time. As you add, these kind of capabilities to the CPU, you've got this machine vision, you've got neural network, deep learning, you've got artificial intelligence going on. All of these stuff is there and has been around for a number of years. A lot of this has shown up in our vehicles. My wife has a 2015 MDX that has a lot of autonomous features built into it. It's got the lane keep assist, it's got the lane tracking, it's got the adaptive cruise control. And all of that stuff is using a lot of cameras, a lot of sensors, and machine vision and machine learning to do all of that stuff and make appropriate autonomous decisions while it's operating. And so, this stuff is showing up in regular cars these days. And so a lot of the technology is for autonomy is there. It's been out there for a while. And the real trick that these guys have done then is they've taken all these pieces and they've glued it together. Then they've added contextual awareness. And to me, this is what's really, really cool about what they've done is it knows a tree is a tree. It knows a power line is a power line. So it not only sees the object, it recognizes the object for what it is. It has contextual awareness. And so that makes it really smart in knowing how to plot its flight path around those different objects. And so that's the kind of thing that these guys have done. That's been the real trick of their software, is gluing all these pieces together, adding this contextual awareness and then packaging it up in a really small form factor. And so they have the tools, they have the capabilities, they have the hardware platform. So that leads me to believe that they can do what they say their videos show, right? So for me, this is a very capable platform, as are the engineers working on this. This is a really impressive piece of technology, and that's why I think it's such an important milestone here. Is they've done what nobody else has done to date. Now, as I said, they've got plenty of CPU cycles, so the software updatable capabilities of this thing also make this very exciting for me. But there's still a lot of unknowns, right? we don't know if the software is buggy. You know, software always has bugs in it, so you know it's going to be real telling when these first units ship in the next couple of weeks if this thing can live up to the hype that's out there. Now, I have a high level of confidence that it can. I don't think they would have offered the warranty that they're offering on this thing if it didn't. But you know, there's still a lot of unknowns. There's a lot of unknowns around some of the features, right? How well does the return to home work? How well does the subject tracking work? How well does the beacon work? You know, there's lots of unknowns around this thing. You know, the image quality. You know, from the dual image processors, it looks like it should be very capable, but you know, we won't know until we start seeing the raw footage, because all we're seeing today is YouTube uploaded stuff, and YouTube runs their own processor over the videos that are uploaded. So we're not seeing the raw footage of this thing and how good or bad the image quality really is. So there are unknowns about this thing, but you know, based upon everything I'm seeing, I feel pretty confident that this thing is going to do what they say it's going to do. I wouldn't have dropped money on this thing myself if I didn't think it was going to do it. But it's going to be one of those things that we're going to have to wait and see, until until the units start shipping. Now, I do have a unit on order. I will be doing a review on this thing when I get mine. Unfortunately, I'm not in the first batch. I don't get mine until the second batch, which starts shipping in January, and I don't know if I'm going to get mine in January, February, or March. But once it gets here, I will do an unboxing, so do stay tuned for that. But this should be pretty exciting. Now, that's kind of my take on things. I'd love to hear from you guys and what you think. So, as always, you guys know the drill. Please leave your questions and comments below. If you like the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you like the channel, please consider subscribing. And we'll see you next time. So thanks for watching, and see you around.